Oh, there you are. I've been waiting for you. Welcome back. It seems that since I have agreed to take this course, I have spent my whole life in cyberspace. And it's only when I have a chance to talk with you that I come back to some kind of reality. When I agreed to teach this course, the small group communications for COM 215 for WNC's organization and project management bachelor's degree program, one of the things my division head told me, reporting to from what you had reported to her, that we needed to cover in this course is how to handle and deal with difficult people. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So sit back, get your notebook out, because I'm going to be sharing with you a lot of things to do. It would be nice if everybody in an organization, whether it's a nonprofit organization, a governmental agency, or a for-profit business, would be positive and supportive and great communicators. Sadly, that's not the case. I believe it's a manager or supervisor's greatest test to see if they can turn around difficult people. Difficult people are difficult for many reasons, not just one key reason. So I like to talk to you today about a couple of things. Number one, how to identify difficult people, figure them out before you open your mouth with them. Secondly, how to confront them in a positive, productive way that gives them a chance to turn themselves around. And then thirdly, how to handle conflict situations. Conflict resolution situations are best understood by the two parties or three parties are all equal in power and importance. One does not report to the other, like in a supervisory employee situation. So there's a whole extra dynamic there in resolving conflicts where both parties are equal. Over the years and decades now, I've been keeping a list of the most frequent excuses employees give for not doing the work right the first time. And that is, here are some of the most frequent excuses. I forgot. Or no one told me to go ahead. I was just waiting for approval. Or no one was around to answer my questions. I didn't know you wanted it or when you wanted it. I didn't have the resources to do it, so I just sat back. Resources being tools or information or computer time or people resources. I didn't know how. I had other assigned things to do, which is valid in some situations where a worker has multiple bosses. Or the old timers will always say, well, that's the way we've always done it around here. I didn't know it was different. Some people increasingly who are specialists say, well, that's not my department. That's not my responsibility. That's not my specialty. So they hide in their own cubicles. Or I didn't know it was that important. Now, part of that is their own fault. Part of it might have been the organization's communications fault, and particularly their immediate supervisor's fault. My longtime brother of another mother, Dr. Paul Cave, and I have gone to graduate school together in the early 70s and remained close friends throughout all of our careers and lives. Our wives say that whenever we meet together, our individual IQs go down about 50 points during that stay. So they put up with us. But when Dr. Cave was a senior trainer for Wilson Learning Corporation, he came up with brilliantly the reasons for poor work performance. And he only said that there were 4 reasons for poor work performance. Number 1, people do not know how. Valid. People do not know what's expected of them. Communication problem. People don't want to do the task. There's an attitude problem. And finally, something or someone is getting in their ways. Simple. People do not know how. People don't know what's expected of them. People don't want to do the task, or something's getting in their ways. And the more I thought about what Paul said, the more sense it made. There is such wisdom in a simple presentation like that. Paul went on to say, here's how to clear the barriers of poor worker performance. He said, when employees do not know what is expected of them, then define or refine the mission and goals more clearly. Make sure they know their specific roles within the system. When employees do not know how to do something, often because of technological changes, then provide the training, refresher courses, and the follow-up, and give them the time to do this training. He said that when employees do not want to do something, there's an attitude problem, then communicate what their positions require and share the logical consequences from their decisions. We will talk specifically about this later on in this video. When employees do not know that they are not performing well, then provide specific regular feedback through many channels, from one-on-one to formal performance reviews, like we talked about in a previous video. And finally, he said, when someone or something is getting in their way, then he said, listen to them, streamline the communications within the organization, and eliminate as much as you can the cumbersome bureaucracy. A lot of times that means stepping up for them. I heard about 2 months ago a brilliant summary of, if you had to choose one quality that best supervisors do to elicit the best loyalty and communications from their teams, they found out through their research is that the best supervisors protect their people's time. And the more I thought about it, I said, God, that really makes sense. Everything is subsumed under the best bosses, managers, supervisors, foremen, leadmen are the people who protect their people's time. Ponder that. One of my favorite executives I had the pleasure of knowing and helping throughout his early parts of his senior executive career was a fellow by the name of Andre Duchesne. Andre Duchesne was one of these great miners who pulled himself up by his bootstraps to go up through the levels of the organization. He was an underground miner, and in mining, there is a higher status to underground miners as opposed to open pit miners. And Andre was a hard person. And you would know when Andre's angry, because his face would turn beet red, even more red than my face is right now. And everybody would clear out when Andre came out with this beet red face. Andre got to the position where he became superintendent of a mine, then became general manager of a mine. And from that, he went up to the corporate channels. And once we were talking, and I learned to listen to him because he graduated from the School of Hard Knocks. And when he was talking, he says, I don't care what level of an organization you're a supervisor in, if it's me, a general manager level, all the way down to a shifter who's in charge of 3 people for a one shift operation. No matter where you are as a supervisor, you only have 3 responsibilities to do. And he said, you've got to be a good communicator. You've got to listen with intent, and you've got to learn how to communicate clearly. I said, okay. And he says, you've got to be a good educator. You have to educate your people on the big picture. You have to give them the training to keep on doing their jobs. I said, all right, that makes sense. And then he said, the third one you have to do is you have to learn how to reprimand somebody for bad decisions, bad performance. I said, okay, that makes sense. Just communicate, educate, and reprimand. He went on the extra distance then to say that if you are finding more time reprimanding your people, that means you haven't done a good enough job on those first 2 elements, to communicate and to educate. So you own a lot of their poor performances early on, until you eliminate that you're doing the best you can to communicate and to educate. So if you're finding yourself, if you're in some kind of supervisory role, reprimanding a lot, I look inside. What are you doing that is not enough in terms of communication or education? Ponder that one. A lot of bad bosses in organizations, whether it's in government organizations, whether it's a for-profit business, where it's for a nonprofit organization, a lot of bad bosses treat their people like animals or like their kids. And it's this parent-child relationship. Some insecure bosses keep on asserting themselves. Remember, we talked about in a previous video that we're all equal. We all have attributes. Even though we are different at an essential level of human beings, we are all equal. And as such, you have to respect everybody's backgrounds, respect everybody's motivations and decisions. I came up with a list about how to hold people accountable. Here's what I came up with. Treat them as adults. Make them aware that they always make choices as adults. Continually inform them and remind them about the goals, especially in a project management. Educate them on how their individuals' roles fit into the goals of the team and the goals of the project. When problems occur, address them immediately. Do it in private and ask for their sides of the issue. So listen. Focus on what is required. Don't delve into them making excuses or blaming something or someone else's or debating with you even. Just focus on outcomes and performance improvement. Separate the person from the position. And this is one of the core principles of the actual confrontation process, is say and remember these 3 words. The job requires, or the position requires. That is this and this and this to be done. The job requires that these outcomes should be achieved. Memorize those 3 words. That will help you in difficult situations. Emphasize goals and corrections and outcomes, and work together as a team to assist them, to protect them, so they can be free to improve themselves. Then always follow up. Make sure that after you talk with them, you follow up. One of the biggest things I had to learn how to do is not to react when I was a boss, not to let the emotions or my frustrations of the moment make me say or do things that I regretted afterwards. And one of the things I had to learn how to do is that before I brought up a situation with a worker, which I was talking in private, I had to step back and figure things out and do some self-analysis, do an Andre Duchesne's notion. Have I been doing a good enough job communicating and educating? And if I said, okay, I think I have, then I started focusing in on the individual. When I was a psychotherapist, I took a special pride in being able to identify the core of what's going on with people. And a lot of times I had learned to ask myself 3 key questions and helping to understand and then empathize with a person, especially a troubled or difficult person. First question was, what are their needs, personal needs they're trying to fulfill? Remember in an earlier video, I talked about Andras Angel, that obscure psychologist in Boston of the mid-20th century. He said, all of our needs as workers can be reduced to mastery and participation. So I said, what kind of mastery needs are they not meeting or having an opportunity to meet? What kind of participatory needs are they not meeting? And you see, it's not the organizations or the supervisor's responsibility to meet those people's needs. It is the responsibility for that supervisor to create this work environment and the situation so people have a chance to meet those needs of mastery and participation. Whether or not they do so is up to them. At least you can provide the opportunity for and the challenges for them to meet their mastery needs and participatory needs. When people's needs are not met, even though they may not be aware that they have these needs, they use these ways, more counterproductive ways, to meet their needs by acting out, by slowing down, by making excuses. And they know it's counterproductive, but that's the only thing they have available. So what are their needs on the job? Second question I ask is the old behavioral psychology question, and that is, what are they getting out of these inappropriate or counterproductive behaviors? What are they getting out of it? They have to be getting something out of these counterproductive behaviors, or they wouldn't be doing it. Maybe they're frustrated in some things. Maybe they've lost meaning or purpose in what they're doing in the organization. Maybe they're burnt out, which is an increasingly relevant issue in the post-pandemic lives that we're leading right now. People are just burned out. Then I ask the third question, and that's the question I've always had as my trump card, my hold card to play, and that is, what are they afraid of? Even though they may not be aware of their fears, a lot of times fears are deeply rooted within inside of ourselves, covered up with other things that obfuscate the clear definition of them. What are their fears? What are they afraid of doing or becoming or changing? I have found that usually at the core of some kind of bad and consistently inappropriate behavior is some kind of fears, whether it's fears of inadequacy, fears of embarrassment or ridicule, fears of change. There's some kind of fear beyond that. Fear of the unknown, fear of the known. A lot of people who have technological problems like me, fear of failure on little things, until I found out that the computer won't bite me if I do something wrong. Then I was more free to experiment with things. So these three questions I ask myself before I confront an employee is that, what are their needs? What needs of their mastery needs or participatory needs are they not meeting? And am I in the way of that? Or how can I create the situations where they have the opportunity to meet their needs? What are they getting out of these inappropriate behaviors? They have to be getting something out of it, whether it is freedom of any kind of responsibility, freedom of any kind of accountability, recognition, being a drama person. They're getting something out of those inappropriate behaviors, or they wouldn't be doing it. And the third question I ask myself, what are their fears? What are their fears of doing or changing or becoming? If I just take the time to ask myself those questions, even if I don't come up with specific answers to those questions, I'm a lot better able to do the actual confronting process of work when I'm working with a person. Again, my role is in the reprimand to help communicate better and to educate better so that we resolve some of these situations and so they maybe not repeat themselves. Okay, the actual confrontation process is after I've done all of my homework and as quickly as I can, I handle the situation directly, immediately, and in private. No one likes to be called out in front of their friends or colleagues. Doing it in private. I have to specifically define what's wrong. What are they not meeting standards with? Not as a way of debating things, not as a forum for them making excuses for it. And after I define those things, I talk about decisions. You know, you've made the decision not to do the job right the first time. You made the decision to not follow the guidelines or the safety procedures. Even you have not made the decisions you need to make. People need to be aware that they decide things, and there are always consequences to what they decide or what they don't decide, which is actually a decision in itself. There are always consequences to our decisions. One of the best tools you have as a supervisor is documentation. Make sure you are somehow recording it in your personnel file on that person, these kinds of behaviors, because there is a lot of power and significance to something that's on a computer screen or even in your notebook, if you will. Make sure you document these things so those things you put in turn into be facts of what you do. Okay. Listen to them, ask them without them complaining or blaming. You have to cut this short. So you ask them, what's going on here? What's getting in your way? Is there somebody or something that is prohibiting you from doing this? And listen to them. Don't let it go over the line for them blaming or making excuses or whining or blaming you, because a lot of people are very good at that. But listen to them, and then talk about the key thing I had mentioned earlier, and that is those three key words: the position requires, or the position, the job position requires this to be done. The position requires that this needs to be done consistently. By putting out these three key words, the position requires, you're putting forth that you're separating the position that they're in from themselves, particularly with old timers on the job. They think they are their position. They think that they cannot be replaced. All of us can be replaced. Excuse me. Using that phrase, the position requires these functions to be done over and over again. The position requires that you coordinate and communicate with other people on the project. The position requires, if there's a job description, that's even better, that to remind people this job was defined to do this. Separate the person from the position that they happen to be in. That will speak volumes to you. This notion of logical consequences is one of the best strategies for the actual confrontation process. It works well in business management, and it also works well in parenting. Those of you who are parents have learned this notion of logical consequences. And what that essentially means is that you are laying out in a logical, linear way that there are consequences to their decisions, such as, if you continue to decide to do this, I will have no other choice than to do this. Lay that out in an unemotional, linear, logical way. If you decide to keep on doing this way in the unproductive ways, I will have no other choice but to do this. I have let people go before when I was a boss. I have to believe, and it's maybe my own rationalization, I never fired someone. They decided to leave. I gave people second and third and fourth choices of them knowing what to do. And they chose not to. And I had no other choice but then to let them go. Using logical consequences. Even you may be churning with anger inside or frustration inside, logically present that the position requires this and this and this to be done. If you decide not to do that, the consequences of that is that I will have only this decision to make. Does that make sense to you? Hopefully it does. And it's, if you learn how to unemotionally and logically present it in terms of their decisions, help you create other decisions or limit the decisions you have available to them, then you can keep on giving them a situation where they know what to do. And that's part of the solution of this. Excuse me. And that is to talk about not so much after a while what they're doing wrong, but what they need to do to improve. Remember our video training on the performance review. It's emphasizing what to do, how to improve. It's the same here, that a reprimand is a little mini performance review. So talk about what is needed, what is required, how they are amenable to doing that, and what do they need from the person to help them along the way. You run interference for them. You protect their time to do those things. You provide the training. You provide more means of communicating. Okay. Talk about how to improve, what is needed, what should the end results look like. A lot of people don't understand this, that when they are performing poorly on the job, they think it's just done in isolation. No, what they're doing, particularly in a project management or a big team operation, what they're not doing impacts the project completion as well as their teammates. This is the time then near the end of the confrontation, when you're talking about how to improve, you also put this in with, by you doing this, your position will start helping the rest of the teammates, or it will enable all the rest of the folks to be back on track with the project. You communicate how their improved actions will benefit and help people on the team. So they start tying in to their participatory needs, if they have any participatory needs. I'm a great believer that when you confront somebody, reprimand somebody, it's not just reaming somebody out and leaving them hanging out to dry. It's putting in a very pointed way, very factual way, what they need to do to improve, and then follow up with it. If they've promised that they will do something better, then keep an eye out on them for the next week or so. And when they don't do it, come up to them right away and say, Jane, that's exactly what we were talking about a week ago. Make it humorous, but they know that you're following through on them. And then compliment them, reinforce them of saying, Charlie, that is terrific. You've changed the way, and that's a hard thing to do. And I admire you for that. Well done. Follow up on that. I believe that handling a difficult person that is you're responsible for and they're accountable to you for is one of the tests. Can you turn this person around? I have known supervisors and managers who become professionals at this, in that they take pride in turning around a person, that these people become a lot more energetic, a lot more loyal, and they become a lot better team player if you give them a chance to turn themselves around. Okay. Hope all of this makes sense right now. I want to talk about conflict resolution within organizations, or if you're part of a project management team, conflict resolutions with vendors or suppliers or your customers on that. Remember, conflict implies that there are two parties of equal power, that they don't really impact each other in a vertical way. It's a horizontal condition. So the goal of resolving a conflict is not only to resolve the issues, but also to create the new environment so you can work better together down the line. Because in a conflict situation, usually these parties will have an ongoing relationship. Many people think that they can bully their way in a conflict situation, and that will be that. They don't think beyond that, that it's an ongoing relationship that gets better or worse based on how this conflict was handled. Those of you who are been successful in your primary loving relationships understand that if the conflict is resolved well, the relationship becomes better. It's the same thing with all forms of small group communication. Samantha Horn, one of my professional speaking colleagues who was living in Hawaii when she wrote her really neat book called Tung Fu, not Kung Fu, but Tung Fu, about communicating. She had the best ideas I've ever heard about whether or not to confront somebody. Just because you're in a conflict situation doesn't necessarily mean you have to bring it out in the open. Before you do, ask what Sam Horn recommended, whether or not to confront or not confront. The first thing is she said, is it trivial? Is it meaningless? Is it an innocent mistake? Then she says, is it a persistent concern? And if it is a persistent concern, that gives you some input saying, I may need to confront this down the line. What's the history of this situation? Was it a one-off, or has it been continuing? Who was involved with the initial problems with it? Then she asks, is the behavior intentional or is it innocent? Sometimes we give too much credit to people saying, well, that was their grand plan. Sometimes people just don't know how they're coming across. And then she said, can it or will it change? And if it won't change, why bring it up? That's just beating yourself against a wall. And then she said, if you confront it, would it be a short-term win for you, yet a long-term loss for the relationship? These questions I've asked myself in a conflict situation. And sometimes it's just not worth bringing something up, that there's no solution to it. Here is my system that I've created for resolving conflicts between equal folks. Number one, both sides must sincerely want to resolve the issue. Like anything else in interpersonal communication, in small group communication, if one or both parties don't want to resolve it, it won't be resolved. Talk it out. Have the courage to bring it up and work it out. Both of you will grow from this. Both sides, number two, should state their perspectives on the issue. Many times, the conflict resolves on having different perspectives. We're seeing the same thing from different angles. So keep things as objective as possible. That means objectify the problem from your own points of view. By listening to them, then you may see that their perspective is different, not better or worse, but just different. Remember, our perceptions, our perspectives define our realities. So honor their perspectives. Even from your point of view, it doesn't sound appropriate or logical. Honor their perspectives and their positions. Along with that, number three, be specific. Don't let past issues or unresolved issues in your relationship cloud the current points that you are working on. Clearly state what you consider the problem to be as much as you can, and you may have to restate it or repeat it in a couple different ways. As such, listening is critical. Do not devalue the other people's views. State what you had. Remember that skill called paraphrasing? State what you've heard and what the other person's position to be. And here's the clue, and here's the key transition point, that early on in this process, it's two sides beating against each other. By learning from each other, what will happen is that you start pulling together and working toward the resolution of a problem. And that is discuss possible options and outcomes and desired outcomes. This is crucial. Both of you cease to be working against each other and start becoming teammates, working on the resolution of this problem, and start agreeing how each of you will resolve this objective problem out there. Commit yourself to it. Now's the time to make it personal. Early on in the process, we're talking about objectifying the problem. Now, near the end of the process, when you know what you need to do, I'll spend more time with you. I'll give you more time on that. Yes, make it personal. I promise to do that. Hear your own self commit to something. Along the way, you may have to tweak it You may have to revise and review it so that you learn what the conflict was, how you guys work together to resolve it. One final thing that may be appropriate is that weeks after the conflict has been resolved or handled or minimized, and sometimes minimizing is a victory, then bring it up to your partner of how did we handle that thing? When things are going well, bring it up, not bringing it up when something else is going wrong. When things are going pretty smoothly, say, remember that conflict we had 2 weeks ago when we resolved it? How can we do that better next time? And talk about how you worked it out. And that will help reinforce your own system of resolving problems. I'm a great believer that people have the right to their perceptions. They have a right to their perspectives. So this is not a win or lose situation. That old formula of both of us taking away something that we can learn and build on, I think is success as well. Work relationships or project management relationships are ongoing. And part of this is learning how to understand the people and how to relate with people. Go back at some point to this video to see what you can apply. That's a lot of stuff I have put into this video. I'd rather have it just in one video right now and give you the opportunity that somewhere down the line, when a new situation pops up that you have to confront somebody or that have to learn how to resolve a conflict, that you can go back and play this video. I have, for my students in the COM 215, I have a little laminated reminder card I wrote on the guidelines for handling difficult people, whether it's a customer service situation or a work situation. For my COM 215 students, if you want this, please email me your snail mail address. Along with this, if there were some handouts throughout this whole video course that you wanted a hard copy of, when you email me to your snail mail address to get this laminated reminder card, say, hey, I would like to have your handout on resolving the mission, or what's the 3.5 steps of effective delegation. If you want hard copies of any of the things I covered with, I'll be glad to put them in the snail mail package with the guidelines for handling difficult people. Okay. All right, I'm going to go back to my cyber universe place, preparing our next talk together. Thank you.